There is so much more that is going on in our subconscious that we don't have access to. Our attention is a spotlight. And I like to think about dreams, and because it's this very complex simulated world that you're experiencing. And I've had many experiences in a dream state where I'll be playing music or listening to some kind of music thing going on, and it's much more complex than my conscious mind could possibly produce. There is this vast reservoir of inner resources that we don't normally have conscious access to in our beta brainwave active goal orientation state. And perhaps when we silence the mind and go into that slower state, that more present state, those are channels that allow that flow of inner resources into our conscious mind. Because our modern conscious awareness is entrained into like this very, very small spotlight. And because we tune out what is irrelevant to our survival. We don't have an expansive awareness in modern society because the structures that organize our lives basically force us to, we have to be living in abstraction in order to function in society, and like into symbolic consciousness and symbols. If you're thinking in language, that's inherently reductive. And we tune out so much when we're thinking in words. And as I'm speaking right now, I'm directing your attention. But in that foregrounding, in that attending, you are automatically backgrounding the rest of your immediate environment and the rest of reality. And we need to routinely entrain or practice silence and sensory integration in order for us to be able to see beyond the mental model, see beyond the map, because that is all we see is the map. We no longer see the territory because we just have this going on in our heads. And that's basically society, the structures that organize our lives, entrain us into that mind. And I think that's a very dangerous thing. There are many, it's like I can focus your attention right now. And there are so many things that are happening right under our noses that we are not aware of. And we can look in the distance and we can think of the color green. Maybe even look around a little bit, utilize your peripheral vision. And then suddenly everything green begins to pop out. And then you can do the same with the color blue, or any color for that matter. I see blue, I see blue, I see blue, I see blue, I see blue. We can think of the feeling of the space between our toes. We can focus on the sensation of our breath, pulling it in, and then it falls out. We can notice the sensation of the clothes touching our skin. Especially when we move around, it becomes more apparent. There's this universe of happenings that goes unnoticed. And you can look up selective attention tests on the internet. I won't give any spoilers, but there's some very interesting little videos you can watch. So to function, as I said, to function in modern society, we need to live in abstractions. Literacy and arithmetic are highly emphasized in society, and so we're entrained into the map. And within the structures that organize our lives, there are embedded and implicit values. There are ideas that give rise to the way that we create and modify the environments around us. And so, because we are swimming in an entirely human-constructed environment, our mind is patterning off of that fully human-constructed environment. And so thought is being fed by thought, and this spirals the mind into abstraction. And the antidote is to come to our senses routinely. And if Alan Watts had said, if all you do is think all the time, then you'll have nothing to think but thoughts. I love that, because it's you get trapped in conceptual thinking. And thinking is a box. Verbal thinking is inherently reductive. If you're thinking in words, as I previously said, you are reducing the world. Language is linear and strung out in a line. Reality and our sensing is multidimensional and multimodal. And we can train our senses to perceive the world and take in large amounts of information at a moment's glance. We can do something that's really complex, and then we can verbalize what we're doing, and we can spend hours verbalizing what we just did, but yet it happens in an instant. And so I have a story about a box. Quite a few months back, I was at a tracking club, and we had the objective to look for some track and sign. We had 30 minutes to do so. And prior to that tracking club, I was out with my partner, and we discovered some nuts that were wedged into the raised surface, the raised bark on a tree. And so while I was at this tracking club, I was walking around, and I was wanting to show people what I had found earlier. And I was like, oh, I want to look for that to find people. It shouldn't be hard to find. And so I was wandering around, noticing all of the trees that were around me that had elevated, thick bark that a nut can be wedged into. I didn't find any nut. And in that 30 minutes, I only managed to find one thing to show the group, because my mind was boxed in. I was, in that same way, like thinking of the color green, your attention narrows, because our attention is a spotlight, and our attention is basically guided by the internal simulation that we project onto the world. And so if we don't have something in our map, it doesn't exist to us. And think about what that means regarding our inability to sense the world around us and to read into the intrinsic meanings of nature. Nature no longer exists in our frame of reference. So you need to practice. You need, and so I also, that experience, actually, there's another thing I want to say about that. That experience, this question arose in me. How do I not get boxed in like that? Then in subsequent tracking clubs and times when I went out, that question just kept arising. How do I go into the environment and be a receptacle? And so in subsequent tracking clubs and having the pressure of having to find some things to show people, that extra pressure made it even harder for me to be open, to be in a state of passive receptivity. And so I would strategically look for things and box myself in that way. And then I would do this constantly, and then that question kept coming up in my mind. How do I transcend the box? And what is the box? Remember? Thinking itself is the box. How do I be receptive? How do I be a receptacle? And it took me a while to realize, because I had this other experience a few months back where I went out on my own. There was no pressure to find something for a group of people. And I dropped into this silent mind, and I went out into nature, and suddenly I began to notice a lot more. And I realized that all of those experiences that I had of being in the box were, in a sense, they were necessary. Because I was building in those neural circuits, integrating those search images, and practicing observation. And with each little thing that I was looking out for, because there are predictable places where animals leave tracks and sign. In trees, on logs, on fallen logs, in cavities that are at the base of trees, on stumps, on objects jutting out of a stream, at the bank of a river. There's predictable places. And so I was integrating all of these perceptual skills and this ecological tracking, and it all coalesced in that moment when I went out by myself and I went all over the landscape. And it's body radar is the word that John Young used to describe this, and I understood it kind of conceptually then, but then I fully experienced it in that moment, and I was being pushed and pulled by the landscape, and I was finding things a lot easier because I practiced looking for things, and then that strategic looking has to be transcended, and you need to go into the forest with that silent mind, with the practice of silencing the mind and having practice of knowing how to look. And so there's these layers of integration that happen as we integrate our sensory experiences, because there are layers to reality. And Tom Brown Jr. had said the words, "A great tracker can take in a large amount of information in a moment's glance." And that's because a good tracker has spent time in that state and spent time looking and observing and calibrating their senses, calibrating their map. And so, like, for instance, I don't remember bird calls as a child. And it wasn't until I was an adult and I became a naturalist and I began tuning in, I began listening. And I've done this so much that now when I go out, even if I'm not consciously trying to pay attention to birds, the sounds will jump out at me. Because I've had so much practice that processing has been relegated to the subconscious. I no longer have to think about it. It has become second to nature, which is the title of this video. The subtitle is Empowering Intuition Through Sensory Integration. I never touched on what intuition is. Intuition is basically that subconscious processing. It's and our intuition is trained by our experiences, and so maybe it has a spooky element to it. I don't know, but there is definitively experiential aspects to the training of and the development of our intuition. And our intuitions can be wrong because our map isn't calibrated properly, and so her intuitions about things can be far off. And so in that same way with the birds and a great tracker taking in a large information in a moment's glance, there's a whole suite of sensory cognitive capacities that have become dormant in the modern human, in the domesticated human. And when the whole of our hunter-gatherer ancestral nervous system is activated, we are in our primal minds, we are in the animal mind, and there is something essential in that state of mind. Absolutely essential for any viable future, for sustainable habitation, regenerative, take it a step further, regenerative habitation on this planet requires connection to and awareness of the natural world. How can we expect to make good land management decisions if we don't even perceive at the basic level. We don't even perceive the plants outside of our front door, let alone complex ecosystem relationships and interactions. So a lot of people talk about, and they'll get this sensation in their body that the animal is nearby, or that the animal is watching them. And I think that there is something to this, and I think that ability is a part of our basic survival ability, that is the synthesis of all of these layers of sensory integration that is our birthright, that we are developmentally stunted in a very important way, living in a modern society. Animals, wild animals, are living in that state where what we perceive as intuition, like they are living in that, because they are taking in the totality, the gestalt perception of their immediate environments, and they are detecting patterns, and then they begin to associate spontaneously through their experiences and through their development. They begin to associate these gestalts with certain outcomes, and because they are living in direct relationship with the wild world around them, they take in the wholeness of that field of meaning. And so they are, as particularly because individuality is a thing, particularly the old, mature animals, they are the wise ones. And they are the ones who have been around the block, and they have had experiences that have, and they don't take chances. And they are so tuned in to what's going on around them. They know their home range. They know the land like the back of their hand. And that is how they got to be that age. And that animal mind that they live within, that primal mind, that state of receptivity to their environments, and that sensory ecology and sensory communication that they are participating in, that is our birthright. And the absence of that leaves us stuck in the box. Nate Harvey had said that the animals are living the map. They are being pushed and pulled by what I call the Valence Landscape. And the Valence Landscape is their embodied responses to their ever-shifting, complex, dynamic environments. And they are being pushed and pulled by countless variables that is part of that gestalt field that I mentioned, that they have integrated as a part of their home range. And they are responding to topography, to predator avoidance, to wind direction, to scent communications, to weather, to temperature, seasonal shifts, food availability, all of this complexity of their wild world, of their natural environments, is being integrated. And there's this other thing that I thought was really cool, is that an animal's home range automatically, especially their core areas, automatically exclude other animals because they become masters of their home range. And so they know where everything is, and they have a profound strategic advantage over animals who are just passing through. And they know how to move on a landscape. And that's something that because our movement, what I'm doing right now, is communication. And the way that we move on, body language is an ancient form of communication. And the way that we move on the landscape is broadcasting intent. And our body language is an expression of our intent. And so we can learn to move on the landscape and to not set off the alarm systems, the birds, everywhere we go. We can, by first of all, being in that inner silence, and secondly, respecting the animal's space, respecting the space of the birds. If you see a bird in front of you, don't just walk into it, and because everything in the forest is going to know that you're there. So nature basically forces awareness. And I'm just going to wrap this up and say, to go back to the title, second nature, empowering intuition through sensory integration. I believe that was the title. Empowering our animal mind through coming to our senses routinely to the point where it becomes integrated and it becomes second nature. And that was just another way of saying the title, basically. But that's all I have to say for now.